Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm excited to be here today with Jim Benson. Jim, welcome.
Hey, Shana.
And we are going to be talking about the sexually integrated man pyramid, which this is a really exciting creation, or I don't know what you would call it,
Model. We'd call it a model.
A model, right, that you've come up with, Jim, that I as we've been talking about it, I'm really appreciating how it highlights where men can get stuck. And, in the realms of power, in the realms of sex, in the realms of relating, and then not have the relationships or the sex lives, or that sense of power and confidence in the world that they want. So let me give a quick intro to Jim and then we'll dive in. Jim has really dedicated his life to helping men attain sexual mastery and create deeply satisfying, intimate relationships. And he's been leading sex and intimacy workshops in the US and Europe for 15 years, both on his own and with the amazing co-teacher, Margot Anand. And he's developed programs including Sexual Energy Mastery, Multi-Orgasmic Lover for Men, the Awakened Masculine Bootcamp, and he's helped thousands of guys experience breakthroughs both in and out of the bedroom. So Jim is a certified skydancing tantra teacher and a professional certified coach. And in previous incarnations, he authored 2 books and over 50 articles on the confluence of technology, art, and graphic design. And I love this part, you're also a world champion in 2 different Frisbee sports. So, talk about man, right? You've done a lot of things kind of Renaissance man-like. And what I really appreciate about you is your humility and your willingness to talk about your own struggles, and that you're not sitting from a high and mighty place saying, here's where you can get to and you're going to be perfect. You talk about the light and the dark and your own experience of it. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, Sheena.
Yeah. So I'm excited to get into the sexually integrated man pyramid and, wondering first both what it is, right? So men can have an understanding of it and how you came to create it.
Yeah, I'll just say first about this whole concept of models that we use to describe reality. Like some people use astrology, some people use the Enneagram, some people use an elemental model like the 5 elements or 4 elements. Some people use masculine or feminine, model. I kind of use all of those, I think, at one point or another. But I just want to say that models are poor masters. And
thank
if they
you.
can help you understand your reality and be more compassionate with yourself and with others, then awesome. Great. Yeah. Use it. Whatever works. But don't let it run the show.
Thank you. It's a really great way to start this, right? Use a model to help you understand yourself, but don't feel like then you need to be a slave to a model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this particular model came about after a workshop I led with Robert Glover, who is the No More Mr. Nice Guy. I think you've done a podcast with him, Shayna?
Yes.
Maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a
Robert's
great one.
awesome. I was privileged to lead, co-created a workshop called The Sexually Integrated Man with him about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a great treat to work with him. And he talks about the two ends of the spectrum in his work. There's the bully on one end, or the jerk, and then there's the nice guy on the other end.
Mm-hmm.
And after that event, I started thinking about other archetypes that might fit on that spectrum. And there were two others that came out. One would be the strategizer guy, and the other is the flow boy, or the puer. And that, having those guys in there, those aspects, those archetypes, seem to round out the picture a bit more.
Uh-huh.
And then rather than a spectrum of some kind, I designed a four-sided pyramid. So each of those aspects would be a side of that pyramid. And then as you evolved that aspect, so for instance, as your strategizer began to trust more and more in life and not trying to control it with his mind, he could take steps up the pyramid and become more and more integrated.
Uh-huh.
And so at the, I'll talk more about the integration later on.
Yeah.
But this idea that you become more whole as a sexual creature as you're able to become more aware of these aspects and grow them.
Interesting, right? And a sexual creature.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about that, right? Like we are kind of, these animals and these sexual creatures, and the bully, the strategizer, the nice guy, and the puer. I can see sex is sometimes just such a concrete way to look at so much of what's happening in our life and our interactions, right? So as you've done, you've worked with men in and out of the bedroom, I can see that this would be really useful for all areas of life.
Right, exactly. The sex is a microcosm for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And
yes.
what happens in the bedroom holds true in the boardroom a lot of times.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those same things that if you make changes or shifts in your sex life, it'll ripple through the rest of your life. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
and you can see so much of how you relate with others by
right.
looking at this physical aspect.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when I presented this model at a recent workshop that I led, so I'm in front of the group and I'm writing up the percentages I am of each of these archetypes, using myself as an example. And there are guys in the back of the room who've known me for 20 years. There's some guys that know me really well.
Long time.
So I'm writing up my percentages. I'm like bully 10%, strategizer 30%. Flow boy 30%, and the guys in the back room are like, no, flow boy 40%, 50%. They're like, yelling at me from the back of the room, and it's just cracking me up because I'm like, yeah, do I really know myself? It's so helpful having guys who know you give you feedback. This is why I've been leading men's groups for 20 years, because there's something so valuable about people really knowing you and telling you about yourself in ways you just can't see. It's your blind spot. So
yes.
I was thinking, oh no, I've moved me on flow boy, and they're like, nah, man, flow boy 40% minimum. So anyway, that's
so how does that show up in your life, right? Like what is flow boy? That part of you, what does he do or choose?
Well, flow boy is, we'll talk a little bit about this later because I think I have an example of a friend who is that way. But for me, it's just a lack of desire for any responsibility. I want to be free of constraint. So we'll talk about the evolution of those aspects in just a minute. But I was just raised in a way where my rebellion, the way I pushed back against my culture and my family, was to not take on any responsibility or take it on just minimally.
Uh-huh.
And there are other people, of course, who do the total opposite. They're completely responsible and take on a ton. And so they're very grounded, and they have like a 10% flow boy, and they could really use some more. They could use a part that really lets them cut loose and transcend. But it's probably good for us to get into more of the descriptions of what each of those are.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So let's do that.
So the goal isn't to necessarily be balanced in all four archetypes across the board, 25% of each, 25%. That's not where you're headed, because we all have our different orientations coming into these bodies that we have, and we're shaped by our environment, and so we're set up a certain way. But it's helpful if you know where you stand so you can make adjustments. So for me, I'm thinking there are often times when I would avoid a confrontation because my bully is the lowest number. And so by challenging myself, by going like, oh yeah, here's what I do in confrontations, I really have to step it up here. So calling on my bully, I don't mean to be a jerk, but I just want to call in the power of that archetype. So I can stand up and be like, hey, that's not okay what you just did, or actually be forceful or intense if necessary. So it's been a long, slow climb for me to come from 0% or something under 5% up to 10 even.
Right. I mean, part of what I love about this too is that you're not in some models, right? You're one or the other, or you have to choose, or you can be other things, but you're mainly one thing. And what it sounds like you're saying is that, we've all got, or men in this model all have different percentages of each of these. And I imagine there's different ways to work with them, or from what you're saying, right? Like the bully, none of these are all bad. The bully actually has in it some assertion or power or an ability to communicate and, set boundaries, or, that there are good qualities in each of these as well.
Yeah, so maybe it makes sense to talk about each of them so everybody has a context for what we're talking about.
Yeah, let's do that.
So the bully, aka the macho jerk. So if we filter this through the lens of power, what he imagines as powerful is a statement like, only my needs are important, or she's an object for my pleasure, or the more money and traditional power I have, the better. Or, so there's a certain sadistic aspect to the bully.
Which I imagine it might be hard for people to admit, for men to admit that I have this part of me. So if you're listening and you feel like, ooh, I can relate, or hearing this, I can kind of see how some of this is me, but I wouldn't necessarily go that far into claiming some of those. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I think all of these, as we describe them, if you hear something that grates on you or rubs you the wrong way, you're reacting in one or the other, reacting one of two ways. It's like, I promised myself I would never be that, or that sounds really close to home and I don't want to hear you say anything about it.
Yep.
So we're going to get to the positive shadow, we could call it, a little later, but let's just go through this list of the kind of the real shadow, the negative aspects of these archetypes.
Great.
So the strategizer guy, at least in terms of his power, is like knowledge is power. If I can get the technique that will make her come 3 times and scream my name with pleasure, that's what I'm after. So and he can be a know-it-all. His defense is to withdraw. He'll withdraw into his head, and because it's safe there into the world that he's built in his head.
Yep.
So at his worst, you could say he gets frozen in the bedroom, say, frozen in performance anxiety. He's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say.
I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the right
Give
thing.
me the formula. I don't know it. So he gets kind of locked up like that. Yep. The flow boy, our number 3 guy, is the pleasure seeker. So he's like, oh, I'm just living for the moment. It's
sounds
actually
like you have a lot of this one. You said.
Yeah, I know. I'm triggering myself as I talk about it. He's hesitant to take on responsibility. I have a friend who's like super puer, and we'd laugh about this. He's like, I'm not even good with houseplants. There's no way I'd even have a fish or a pet.
Oh my God.
I'm not going to take it on.
That's amazing.
So, he'll dissociate because he'll just kind of leave his body, take off, leave himself. He's definitely not into kids because they're a competition for his own child. Right?
No houseplant, no child.
Right. So he's kind of a dissociated bliss seeker.
Mm-hmm.
at his worst.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one is going to be the nice guy, beautifully outlined by Robert Glover. And his other names for him are doormat, wimp, and victim. And so his main defense is collapsing, which totally damages his own integrity, right? When you're
Mm-hmm.
collapsed and there's not anybody there holding you, you're not holding yourself. It's an integrity killer. He's going to be super afraid of risk. Robert talks about victim pukes, like it'll all build up inside of him, and then all of a sudden he's like, "It's your fault. I hate this." Rah. So it's he can't. He's not actually able to say what's happening for him as it's happening. So it
Right.
all builds up with
It all builds up.
resentment, and then comes out in a victim puke.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So again, he's the opposite end of the spectrum of the sadist. He's more of the masochistic style.
Right.
So those are the 4 archetypes of this pyramid.
So it is interesting. I mean, just to hear you speak about all of them. And again, we're only in the kind of the dark parts, not the light. What did you call it? The light shadow or the
positive
of these. So I think it's great though, to just take a moment for you listening, and just consider, right? Which parts of these do I recognize in myself?
Yeah. Just write down some percentages.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. How did you, because I'm just thinking that someone listening might also kind of be like, well, how do I know? How did you think of certain situations as you were finding your own percentages, or how did you find them?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the first time I did this was live in front of a group and from a training that I was leading. And the staff in the back of the room knew me really well. There are a couple of people who known me there for 15 years. And I'm writing up, flow boy, 30%. And they're like waving their hands like, nope.
Higher.
So it was funny. We laughed, but another part of me was like, damn, I think I know myself, and I'm not totally sure that I do.
Right. Okay. So another way then, if you're not clear as you're listening to this, would be to ask other people and see what range you get.
And your woman, your female partner, let's say man or female partner,
right? If you have a female partner, right, or a man partner,
will give you different perspective than a friend,
mm-hmm.
And then say a family member.
Mm-hmm.
So it's curious to get those varying feedbacks. It's like a 360, as they say in the business world, a 360 for yourself.
Right.
Getting feedback from all the people who know you.
Yeah.
But good to give it a try yourself, and then check it out with others.
Yes, that's awesome. I was just thinking, right, like the nice guy might be more tempted to go get it, or the flow boy might be more tempted to go get it outside, versus the strategizer's like, okay, I got this. I can, can figure this out about myself.
That's right, Shana. You're getting it.
Interesting. Okay, cool. All right. So then where do you want to go next with this? Because I can see there are ways to integrate or step into the gifts of each of these, or is there anything you want to talk about before we even go there?
Yeah, so let's say that there's things that all of these types can do to become more sexually integrated.
Uh-huh.
And so there's some universal principles that all of them can use, and then there's specific ones to each archetype.
Oh, great.
That will be that each man can say, oh yeah, here's something that I could do that would be really powerful for me. And then we can talk a little bit about the positive shadows or the gifts from each of these too. So
awesome. Yeah. All right. Let's start with the universal principles and then go into the individual ones.
Okay. So one of the main universal skill to becoming more sexually integrated, I would say, is mindfulness. So track yourself, become aware of habits of your highest percentage, or the ones that seem to be most active in certain situations, and give yourself like that gap between the action and then realizing it. So you can take a pause and just like, oh, here's where I would do the thing. Let's just check in for a moment. Is that the best thing for me to do? Here, my habit here would be to withdraw and not say anything and then just walk away.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's going to take a lot for me to push into that.
Yes.
And now stay here and just say something like, I don't know what's happening, but I'm not comfortable right now. Just, to get something out of my mouth
Yep.
instead of just walk away. So, okay, I think I can do that. So,
That's so great. I'm just
my,
loving the range too of how different it is for different people, right? Where one man might be like, all right, I just need to get a word out of my mouth or say something. And for another man, it's like, keep your mouth shut, just
right,
breathe, don't say a word, walk
right.
away.
Or for me, a big one for me would be joking inappropriately in certain delicate situations. Like as a
Uh-huh.
way to somehow, well, for me, it was like, oh, I'm just easing the tension, but really it was a way of me escaping being vulnerable in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just starting to track that more and more, and I'm watching the impulse, because it's so strong in me, given my family background and everything.
Right. That's a
Is
really great way to say it too, that watching the impulse.
yeah, it just comes up, and then I'm watching it, and then I'm like, the mindfulness in that moment helps me stop and go, do not open your mouth. It's exactly like what you're saying. And so
I'm,
what
I'm
I'm
just
doing
realizing.
now
Yeah.
with my wife, for instance, my wife is the one that I'm doing this the most with. So
Mm-hmm.
I now can tell her, like, oh, I just had a really adolescent comment. And sometimes she'll go like, yeah, keep that to yourself. Or she'll say, oh, cool. What is it? And it's just different than having it just come straight out of my mouth.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Great.
So that's one of the universal skills. The other one I would say is stop pushing away feelings.
Mm,
All of the archetypes can benefit from allowing yourself to feel more of what's happening inside of you.
yeah.
And there's a fear for so many guys that if I start to feel, the floodgates will break open and I'll crush everybody with the massiveness of my feeling. And usually that's not true at all.
Yeah.
Usually, in a high percentage of time, it's not true.
Yeah.
It's your fear that's the biggest. It's the fear that's keeping you from expressing it. That's the actual problem.
Right.
And so how can you just soften and allow yourself to have the feeling, and whatever it is, I'm feeling so angry right now. Oh, I'm just so grieving. I'm crying right now. Oh, I feel really sad. Oh, I have a weird mix of feelings. I don't even know what it is. Hang on a second. Let
Mm-hmm.
me try to figure all this stuff out.
I love
So
that.
that's the key, is to not push away feelings.
Yeah.
I
I'm
just
just
find that
thinking,
so often, more and more with guys I coach, that this is
yeah.
key.
Yeah. And I was just thinking that too. I was thinking of some of the men I coach where sometimes the fear is, I'm going to look weak or I'm going to overwhelm this other person. And sometimes the fear is if I start to feel this, I'm going to be stuck in this forever. And I was just thinking of a session I was doing the other day where, this guy was on the verge of tears. And then at some point, the tears came. And it was probably a minute or two later, he was like, oh, like I feel a little better now. I feel this release,
Mm-hmm.
right? But before that, the fear can be, God, if I open up these floodgates, I'm just going to, I'm going to cry forever and it's never going to stop, which isn't the case, right?
Yeah.
But that fear can be there.
Yeah. So just trust that the feeling is like a wave that's going to
Yes.
come, crash on the shore, and then it's going to recede.
Yes. Yes. Right. And the more we resist it, the more
Right.
actually it stays.
You dam up the ocean, and then, then it gets ugly.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, good. So that was universal skill number 2.
Yeah.
Are there more?
Well, yeah, like a 2A might be allow vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
So let yourself experience what it's like to be vulnerable. And I think I've probably already given an example of that, but and Brene Brown has been so powerful in this area,
Yes.
talking about the power of vulnerability. And it's not something we normally associate with vulnerability. It's like a chink in the armor, or, oh, here's where I get stabbed because I've exposed my belly. And if you're there holding yourself as you expose your vulnerability, you've got yourself, which is really the key. You're not collapsing into vulnerability. You're able to be with yourself and to be vulnerable at the same time. It opens the doorway for true intimacy and truly integrated sexuality.
I love, and I just had this moment where I wasn't sure that you were going back to sexuality, but I love that you did, because in part because it is, that's such a tie between vulnerability and sex that I think is not always apparent. And it goes so much beyond sex into connection and intimacy and love and, all of that. But But I love that. I think for the men I've worked with, I'm often the one who kind of tries to remind them, or is the one to remind them, right? Like being vulnerable doesn't necessarily have a woman think, he's weak and I don't want to have sex with him. There's actually a way that when vulnerability is expressed, she starts to feel closer, or it could be a man too, a partner starts to feel closer.
Right.
Yeah. And it doesn't always go beautifully. I mean, you and I were both talking about how relationship is hard, and we've all got our own stuff. So, I also caution against trying it once, having it not go well, and then making some conclusion about that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, great.
Another skill to climbing the pyramid, I would say, is learning to listen to your intuition. And that's great both inside and outside the bedroom, obviously. But this is especially good for strategizer guys, because if they're feeling like they need the formula, they are totally blocking their intuition during those moments.
Yeah.
And the very best sex I've ever had has come when my intuition is online and I'm completely not in strategizing mode.
Right.
And it's so hard because there's so much out there, marketing wise, just these are the 5 ways to make her come. I know, my marketing people are doing it too. It's like, what is going to get guys interested? Oh, give me the strategy, give me the 4 keys, and to give a woman so much pleasure she'll never leave you.
Yeah.
And truthfully, one of the biggest pieces is learning to cultivate that inner voice, listening to that inner voice, so you can be alive to what's happening in the moment. So you can now dance with the moment and with her in the moment in a way that you might never have gotten if you had tried to do it with a step A to step B, step C manual.
Yeah. It's so true. It's like I often think about, and I don't necessarily apologize for this, but it's like as a woman, I sometimes wish I could be more stable or want the same thing all the time, or but it's different based on my cycle, my hormonal cycle. It's different based on my mood. It's different. Like it's like I can't even imagine trying to map out, here's what I would like all the time. Here's what would feel good. That in the moment is so important.
For the guys who would be like the best lovers in the world, if I were to say, if I interviewed them, I would say a universal characteristic would be that they were intuitive. They found a way to listen to their intuition and act on it.
Yes. I love that. Right. And attune to the moment, as you said, be in the moment.
Right.
Okay. Beautiful.
And then the last universal skill, I'm sure there's more, but the last one that I've written down is know your deeper wants and needs. Be able to contact your deeper wants and needs. And so, it can be as simple as a mantra or words you say to yourself ongoingly throughout the day. What do I want? What do I need? What do I want now? What do I need now? And this, again, is especially a good antidote for the nice guys who are constantly thinking about what other people want and giving it to them as a way of securing validation and maybe that's how they'll like or love me.
What's your distinction between just knowing your needs versus your deeper needs? Is there something different there?
Yeah. So let's see. Well, first of all, if there was a structure in wants and needs, I would say needs are the strongest. So the need is something that's your need. It's a very strong core want. And then there's a want, and then there's a desire, and then there's a preference, and then there's no preference. So that's kind of in the scale of decreasing intensity.
Okay.
So there's that model. And then I would say that there are some needs that feel non-negotiable, and that there are other ones that feel like, oh, I'm calling that a need, but I'm not so sure that if I didn't get that I would have to leave the relationship, or I would have to the different path in life.
Okay. So you're wanting men to get in touch with the deeper need. It's not necessarily just a preference or something on the surface, but to actually know, what moves me, what touches me, what's fulfilling for me. What do I really want? What's meaningful?
Yes.
Mhm. Awesome.
So, I think there's some other ones we could talk about, but I'll just stop there
Okay.
because I want to
Thank-
talk a little bit more about some of the things that individual archetypes can.
Yeah, I'm really curious about this, right? Like what the individual archetypes can do and what, like you said, what their ideas of what power is, how that's distorted versus what true power is.
Right. So let's go with the bully guy.
Mm-hmm.
His main task to become more integrated is to open his heart and to feel the sadness or the grief that's beneath that layer of anger or judgment or blame others.
Mm.
That kind of aggressive energy that's that's more that can often be posturing, where he sits, the posturing guy.
Uh-huh.
Appearing to be in charge, and usually there's a lot underneath that.
Right, like
So
it's a kind of protective layer, it sounds like.
yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do things. A practice would be to see the child in everyone. So imagine that as you're looking at people, you see them when they were 5 years old, and that can help shift the bully's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And again, learning to apologize or learning to make amends, or um, willing to be wrong and admit it. The vulnerability piece that we talked about, that's really good for bullies to practice.
Yeah. I was just reading a quick thing by Harville Hendricks the other day, which I've heard this in a different context, but I hadn't heard it in the marriage context. But he said something like, you can either be right or you can be married. I've heard it like you can either be right or you can be happy. I mean, either way, they're both, pretty synonymous. But right, that sense of giving up being right or needing to
Right.
be right.
So for strategizer guy, how can you relax your mind and stop making it the thing that's running the show? And that's a lifetime practice for most strategizers, because their whole sense of safety and security is built around control with the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are ways to do that? Have a kid, I'll say.
As a parent, that makes me laugh, right?
Yeah, I know. The solution for a lot of these is have a kid, actually.
Wow. Okay.
But I'm just thinking of more like, put yourself in a situation that's chaotic, and don't necessarily create order out of it.
Right.
So surrender. What is the practice of surrender? What is the practice of quieting the mind? Those are all good ideas for the strategizer. I mean, some people will just say, well, yeah, that's why I smoke pot or take some kind of drug or drink alcohol at the end of the day, is because I can finally relax my mind. Well, is there a way you can do that without having to use some kind of substance?
Right. It's interesting. And it's interesting to hear you say the word surrender, because I imagine that could be, kind of a buzzword or seen as a more feminine quality, which, I believe we all have masculine and feminine. So
Right.
I don't see that as a problem, but even just another way of saying that would be, right, like you said, put yourself in the middle of chaos and then let go of trying to control it, or let go of needing to actually know or understand, how to make it organized or how to make it smooth or something like that.
Yeah, messy is a messiness, I think, that
Mm-hmm.
of life that's natural,
Yeah.
and that the strategizer is trying to avoid that.
Right, which is interesting when you think about sex too, right? I mean, it's not, I don't know if messy is exactly the right word, but it's kind of chaotic, or it can be. I think in, when there's a lot of passion and a lot of energy, there is that kind of chaotic quality in a way to it.
And the program that I'm most excited and use with guys right now in the coaching work is multi-orgasmic lover.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the key principles of that is learning to surrender, because if you're going to become multi-orgasmic, you're not going to do that from a place of control and being in charge,
Right.
of what's going to happen. You have to find a way to open to receive first, and then really, really surrender. And when I talk to guys about that, they're like, I don't know about this. But I'm just saying, it doesn't make you less of a man to learn how to surrender. In fact, it can become incredibly empowering for you.
Awesome.
To feel like surrender gives me power, vulnerability gives me power.
Yes. Oh, I love this.
All right, let's talk about Flow Boy.
Great.
And
Your
what can
favorite.
work for him. So for Flow Boy, one of the things I would say is make choices for long-term gain instead of short-term benefit or pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And, that could be as simple as starting an investment account or, putting money away for yourself in the future. Growing a garden, something that you do over time each year. Have a kid.
Have a kid.
Or learn to tolerate a lack of excitement or boredom. So you become more tolerant of that instead of looking for the next great or cool thing, to find pleasure in the mundane.
Mm-hmm. That's a powerful one too. I can see someone who's used to, wanting the next best thing, being like, "Well, why on earth would I want to embrace boredom?" But it reminds me of a teacher I once saw who was talking about life as like most of us are, really focused on this bright, he was using this color like this bright fuchsia, it's like we need these bright pink, kind of almost overwhelming in order to feel something. And actually there's this subtle pale pink layer of life that's so beautiful and so rich that, a lot of us miss. So it's interesting to see it that way. Or, when my kid comes to me and says, I'm bored, I'm like, great. What do you want to do now? Like, how do you want to actually create something versus, that this is somewhere that is a problem or you have to stop, or, you know what I mean?
Totally. And if we look at it from a sexual lens,
Mm-hmm.
Flow Boy is always looking for the newest, greatest, hottest thing, whether
Right.
it's show me that cool sex position from the Kama Sutra I've never tried,
Uh-huh.
to like, oh, this partner is not giving me the spark anymore, I'm going to go find a new one.
Uh-huh.
And so there's that's kind of the most superficial version of it. But what is it like to stay the course and to find out what happens when you do go long term, when you do stick something out, or when you like, what is it that in you that requires that part to move on? Like, get
Oh,
curious.
that is so powerful. So powerful, especially in a long-term relationship, right? Instead of
Mm-hmm.
trying to try that. I mean, it could be great to bring in a new position or a new
Could be.
spark, but
Yeah.
there's also like, what is it to just touch someone and put your hand on your partner and leave it there and actually feel, for a couple
Yeah.
minutes, or look into his or her eyes, or whatever that is, all the things that we can skip over for the spark.
Yes, exactly.
Mm, awesome.
And then for the nice guy, his pathway to integration involves setting clear boundaries, standing up for himself, being willing to tolerate disappointing others. This one seems really important. Just a lot of guys I coach and who are coming from the nice guy frame, universally they'll say, "Yeah, I hate disappointing others. I didn't want to disappoint my wife, or I didn't want to tell her this because I didn't want to disappoint her." I'm like, if you can tolerate the disappointing other,
Yeah.
you've just taken a huge step forward. Also, to take full responsibility for your life, like 100% responsibility for your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, a few other things like talk louder, take up more space, and hit things.
Hit things. Not people, things.
All right.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
and of course, understand your wants and needs, just like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Stay with that mantra. What are my wants? What are my needs?
Yes. These are so powerful. And I can really see how, starting to get clear. Okay, what percentage of each of these am I? And taking on a practice, even just one practice for the one that you are most, your what do you say? Your
Highest
largest
percentage.
percentage. Yeah, highest percentage. Or trying out a couple different practices for the different aspects. I could see making a huge difference for men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so get creative, guys. Just what's going to work for you with your lifestyle, your schedule? What could you do that would bump up a percentage of a weak one, or take down a percentage of one where you're feeling like, yeah, I'm a little high here. What could I do to chill out that part of myself?
Yeah.
It's been running the show more than I'd like.
Yeah. Awesome. I feel like we could keep going for a really long time, but for now, for time's sake, I'm wondering, what do you want to leave men with, especially, tying this model into what you've seen and all the men you've worked with and your personal experiences. What do you feel drawn to leave them with?
Well, just briefly to say there's the gift of the wound. So each of us are one of those archetypes,
right?
Because of a particular wounding. So I can just tell you the gift of the wound, and then we can just talk about what it's like as you climb higher up the pyramid.
Yeah.
But so briefly, the bully's positive shadow is, we would call him the lovingly dominant ravisher.
Mm-hmm.
And the strategizer's positive shadow would be the thoughtful problem solver.
Nice.
And Flow Boy's positive shadow would be huge pleasure conductor.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice guy's positive shadow would be the heartfelt, attuned guy with great boundaries.
Awesome.
So that's what's possible for each of those aspects.
Right. Okay, great. And then what is it like? What is it like as men climb up the sides of the pyramid toward the top of the pyramid?
Well, what I notice is that as you take steps up, that there becomes less room for distinctions, and you stop looking at people as being different from you, and you see we all get more and more the same as we get higher up the pyramid. So in a good way, right? That's the integrated part. We all become more and more integrated. So our language, we start to have the same language, or we just start to see things similarly. Not totally, of course, but it's like you become more focused on the similarities than the differences. So you start out feeling kind of far apart if you were 100% bully, say. But as you climb up, you're bringing more and more of those other aspects into your life and into the bedroom. So near the top of the pyramid, you're just feeling like, yeah, I was born a bully and raised a bully. I've rounded myself out because there's all these other aspects. So I could be this dominant, loving ravisher and had these other aspects well developed in myself as well.
And do you have a sense of what becomes possible when that happens?
Yeah. I mean, lovemaking goes to a whole new level. Actually, life goes to a whole new level. But in terms of the bedroom, being in the bedroom, you become more of the man that you can be. And women respond to that. Your partners will respond because they'll feel parts of you that have been dormant, or just that, you did have that, that 20% bully inside of you, and now you're cultivating it out in this positive way. And they're like, oh my God, I love when he comes out. Or instead of, bullying all the time, you're like stopping for a moment saying, oh, I think I feel sad right now. And your partner's like, oh my God, he said he felt sad. He's never said that before.
Right.
And her heart just cracks open because you're now integrating those parts that you've not owned or allowed in yourself.
I love that. Right. And then this experience where you're maybe dominatingly ravishing, but then there's this tender emotional part that comes in. And then there's this deeper connection that gets to happen. And then more pleasure comes from there. And yeah, it sounds amazing and beautiful and hot.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. All right. So where can men find more, since this feels a little bit like a teaser, because it's like there's so much more here we could talk about. Where can they find you?
At jimbenson.net.
Great. jimbenson.net. And I'll put the link in the show notes as well.
Yeah. And the Multi-Orgasmic Lover is the program that I love taking guys through. And I do one-on-one coaching with them through that program. And that really helps guys transform their sex lives from feeling like, yeah, I don't last long enough, or I'm not, I'm kind of flatlining in bed, or the main issues that most guys have, and shift and creates radical change for them because they're now tuning into themselves, their own bodies, and their own aliveness rather than externalizing it and having it be about the woman, because you can do this whole program by yourself.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for doing it both in the sexual realm, and I know how far reaching the impact is, to every aspect of a man's life. So thank you for being an awesome support for men.
You're welcome. And such a pleasure to be with you, Shana, as always.
Thank you. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word alive, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.